Imagine the dawn breaking over a medieval kingdom, where the sun creeps slowly across the spires of a cold stone castle. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and burning wood from the kitchens. Inside those fortified walls, hundreds of people stir to life knights dressing in their armor, servants rushing to prepare the king's breakfast, scribes opening their parchment scrolls. Yet, in the middle of this great machinery of courtly life, there is one figure who is neither knight, nor noble, nor scholar. One whose place is precarious, strange, and dangerous, the court jester. If you were the jester, this morning would not be one of swords or strategies, but of performance. Your weapon was wit, and your survival depended on the laughter of the most powerful man in the land. To be the jester was not merely to entertain. It was to step into a role that could sway moods, settle disputes, and in some rare moments, save your own life with a single well-timed joke. You were the strange thread that wove humor into a tapestry otherwise stitched with blood, politics, and ambition. Your clothing was unlike that of any other person in the hall. Brightly colored, patterned in red, yellow, and green. It clashed against the muted browns and blacks of the courtiers' gowns. Bells jingled faintly with each step you took, a sound that announced your presence whether you wanted it or not. To the noble lords you were little more than a fool. To the servants you were someone who could speak truth in disguise. To the king you were both amusement and danger. For kings, after all, did not tolerate boredom, and to bore the king was not just a sin of poor humor, it could be a death sentence. The origins of the jester's role stretch far back, even before the grand courts of Europe. Ancient pharaohs had their dwarfs, emperors had their clowns, tribal leaders had their storytellers who mixed jest with wisdom. By the time of the Middle Ages, the figure of the fool had crystallized into a profession, though not one many envied. You would stand before a ruler who could order your execution with a wave of his jeweled hand, and your only shield was laughter. Yet strangely, the fool had privileges few others did. A jester could mock the king's mistakes when others dared not. He could call a lord pompous, point out the greed of a bishop, or make light of the queen's temper all hidden behind the mask of comedy. What others whispered in fear, the jester shouted aloud, wrapped in rhyme and riddle. And because he wore the cap of a fool, his honesty was tolerated. The truth, disguised as nonsense, became safe. But do not mistake this for safety. The court jester walked a knife's edge. One jest too cruel, one parody that touched a nerve, and your position could turn from privilege to peril. The annals of history hold tales of jesters whipped, beaten, or hanged for a single joke gone wrong. Your life was laughter, yes, but it was also tension, strategy, and survival. This morning, you wake in your small chamber tucked deep in the castle's servants' quarters. The straw mattress scratches your skin, and the thin blanket barely keeps away the night's chill. You hear footsteps above you, the shuffle of armored boots as guards switch their watch, the chatter of chambermaids rushing to their tasks. For them, the day begins with duty. For you, the day begins with invention. What rhyme will you spin today? What trick will you play? What joke will ease the king's foul mood, should he wake with one? You dress yourself in the motley garb, fastening the cap with its dangling bells. In the mirror a polished sheet of bronze you catch your reflection, a face painted with a dash of white across the cheeks, a crooked smile forced upon lips that may not feel like smiling. It is the eternal paradox of the fool, joy painted over worry, humor concealing the dread of misstep. As you step into the great hall, the weight of eyes falls upon you. The courtiers gather, whispering in silks and velvets, eyes sharp with intrigue. They plot marriages, treaties, betrayals. And then, amidst their solemn games, you arrive a splash of chaos, a flicker of levity in their storm of ambition. They smirk, they roll their eyes, but they listen. For they know the jester's words, though wrapped in jest, may carry truths too sharp to ignore. At the head of the hall sits the king, wrapped in furs and gold. His eyes, heavy from last night's wine, narrow as he notices you. He does not smile, not yet. This is the moment upon which everything hangs. His mood is the sun, and you are a small planet orbiting in its glow. If he shines warm, you live. If he darkens, you may not see another dawn. You bow low, bells jingling. The courtiers fall silent. A hush descends, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire, and then you speak. Perhaps it is a riddle about the harvest, or a jest about the bishop snoring in chapel. Whatever it is, the hall watches not the words, but the king's face. They wait for his reaction, for it will dictate their own. And there at last a twitch of his lips, a chuckle. The sound rolls across the hall like a blessing. Laughter erupts, forced and eager, as the courtiers echo their master's mood. Relief floods you, for today you have survived, but tomorrow is another test. Your life as a jester is not a story of endless laughter. It is a story of balance. A life suspended between comedy and catastrophe, where each jest could lift you higher or drag you to the gallows. And as you stand there, bells ringing faintly, the thought lingers. What if the joke had failed? What if the king had not laughed? The hall would still be filled with courtiers, the throne still draped in velvet, the banners still hanging proudly from the rafters. But you would no longer be there to see it. The morning court has ended, and the king has retired to his private chambers. The nobles disperse, their silks rustling as they vanish into hidden corridors where whispers breed plots. For them, the day's work is only beginning. But for you, the jester, the most dangerous part of the morning has already passed. You survived the first laugh. Yet survival is never guaranteed twice. You walk through the corridors of the stone castle, bells chiming faintly as you pass guards with pikes and servants carrying trays of wine. Some smile, politely. Others sneer, few envy your position. To the knights you are frivolous, an ornament rather than a warrior. To the scholars you are crude, a clown in motley who dares speak while they write with ink-stained fingers. To the peasants you are both admired and pitied. Admired because you stand near the king, pitied because you stand on the edge of peril. But they do not understand the strange freedom that comes with your bells, for in your jokes lies power. You can tell the truth that no knight dare utter. You can mock the duke's vanity, the bishop's greed, the queen's pride, all beneath the mask of comedy. It is a dangerous freedom, yes, but a freedom nonetheless. Still, you know the rules. A jester's tongue is a blade, and a blade must be handled with care. One cut too deep, and you are finished. History has seen fools whipped, branded, or even executed for a jest that crossed the invisible line. You cannot afford to forget this. In the kitchens, you sit upon a barrel of ale, playing your lute softly. The servants pause in their labor to listen. For them, your songs are a welcome distraction from endless toil. They giggle at your rhymes, nudge one another at your body, verses, and laugh at your mock-solemn imitations of the steward. Here, among the lowly, your role feels almost wholly a brief reprieve from drudgery. But the servants do not hold your fate. The king does. And the king, though amused this morning, is a man of moods. He is known to rage when his hunts fail, to sulk when the treasury runs dry, to lash out when courtiers displease him. His laughter is your shelter, but his silence can become your grave. You know this all too well. As the sun climbs high, the king prepares for the day's council. Diplomats from neighboring realms will arrive, their banners fluttering above the castle gates. Treaties will be signed, or perhaps torn apart. Tensions are thick, for war always hangs in the balance, and where war whispers, jesters are summoned. For what better way to ease tense negotiations than laughter? What better distraction from betrayal than a fool's quip? You, ridiculous though you appear, play your part in the delicate game of kingdoms. The herald calls you to the council chamber. You enter, bowing low. The room is lined with nobles, knights, and foreign envoys. Their eyes fall upon you with mixed disdain and curiosity. To them, you are both absurd and fascinating, a symbol of a kingdom confident enough to laugh even while speaking of blood and land. The king gestures. You begin? Perhaps it is a story of a farmer who mistook a donkey for a priest, or a parody of a pompous knight who stumbled on his own lance. You juggle apples, drop one deliberately, and feign despair. The room chuckles. The foreign envoys exchange glances, then laugh too, careful not to appear during the king's presence. Laughter fills the chamber, not loud but steady. You feel the tension ease. The king leans back, stroking his beard, pleased. For a moment, peace feels possible. And you realize something. In this hall of swords and scrolls, your jests carry more weight than they appear. They oil the gears of diplomacy, they soften pride, they turn enemies into guests. Yet you know better than to mistake this for true power. You're still a fool, a flicker of humor, nothing more. The courtiers will return to their plots, the envoys to their schemes. And if the king's mood turns sour tomorrow, no jest may save you. After the council, you wander the castle gardens. The air smells of roses and lavender. The statues of saints and kings stand tall, unchanging, unmoved by the laughter or tears of mortals. You sit upon a stone bench, staring at their carved faces and wonder, do they envy you or pity you? They are remembered for centuries, their names etched in stone. You, however, may vanish with a single frown. But perhaps that is the jester's true gift, not to endure forever, but to remind others of their own folly. To hold a mirror, cracked though it may be, before king and peasant alike. To say, with a grin, what others dare not whisper. A servant interrupts your thoughts. The king summons you again, this time, to his private chambers. Your heart quickens. Such summons are rare and dangerous. Alone with the king, you cannot rely on the laughter of courtiers to shield you. Alone, every word carries heavier weight. The chamber is dimly lit, tapestries covering the cold stone walls. The king sits by the fire, his crown set aside, his goblet half full. He looks weary, his eyes shadowed by thought. He waves you closer. "Fool," he says, his voice low, "tell me something true, but do not forget to make me laugh." Your throat tightens. Here lies the essence of your life. Not juggling, not rhymes, not silly dances, but this, the tightrope between truth and humor, between honesty and survival. The king does not want a clown now. He wants the wisdom hidden in your motley. You take a breath, your mind racing. What truth can you speak? What jest can you weave around it? And most of all, will it be enough? The bells on your cap tremble as you bow? The fire crackles, the king's eyes pierce you. And in that silence, your entire existence hangs upon the next words you speak. The king's chamber is silent except for the crackle of burning logs. Shadows ripple across the stone walls and the heavy air smells of spiced wine. You stand before the throne, though here, in this private space, the king sits not upon a throne but in a carved wooden chair. Still, his presence looms as if he were crowned in gold. He leans forward, goblet dangling in one hand. His voice is steady, but carries the weight of command. "Fool," he repeats, "tell me something true, but do not forget to make me laugh. This is the moment you fear most. For juggling is safe, tumbling is harmless, rhymes are easy enough, but truth is dangerous. And when truth must be wrapped in jest, the danger doubles. One misstep, and you are no longer amusing, you are insolent. One wrong word and laughter turns to fury. You smile, though your stomach knots, a painted grin on a trembling mask. You bow deeply, letting the bells of your cap jingle, pretending they are more confident than you. "My liege," you say softly, "truth is like wine. Sweet when sipped, bitter when spilled. Shall I serve it in a silver cup or pour it on the floor?" The king raises a brow. He does not smile, but neither does he frown. A good sign, or so you hope. You begin your tale. A parable thinly veiled, as jesters often do. You speak of a farmer who loved his ox dearly, yet beat it when it failed to plow the field quickly enough. One day, the ox collapsed, broken, and the farmer wept. For though he had land and seeds, he had no strength of his own. The king's eyes narrow. You see his mind working, comparing himself to the farmer, his knights and peasants to the ox. It is a dangerous tale, too sharp, and you are dead. Too dull, and he calls you boring. So you twist it. With a flourish of your hand you add, "But perhaps, sire, the ox was only pretending to faint." For beasts know, as men know, that sometimes the surest way to rest is to fall at your master's feet. A beat of silence. Then the king laughs, a low, rumbling sound, rich with amusement. Relief floods you like a river breaking through a dam. The laugh grows, echoing off the walls. He claps his hand upon his knee, shaking his head. "Clever fool," he says. "You cut me, yet bandage the wound with laughter. You bow again, deeply. Your heart still races, but you have lived to jest another day." The king pours more wine and motions for you to sit near the fire. Rarely does he grant such closeness. You perch on a small stool, still alert, still cautious. Tell me, fool, the king asks, swirling his goblet. Why do you think men obey kings? It is not a question for philosophers nor for priests. Yet here he is asking it of you. Perhaps because he knows that beneath your painted face, you see the world more clearly than those blinded by ambition. You tilt your head, bells chiming faintly, because, sire, men believe kings to be chosen by heaven. But between you and me, I think heaven has a strange sense of humor. The king bursts into laughter again, wine spilling onto the rug. You chuckle along, though inwardly your heart thunders, for even in laughter you know you've dangled over the pit. After a time, the king waves you away. You bow once more, backing out of the chamber, your knees weak but your mask unbroken. As the heavy door shuts behind you, the corridor's chill air feels like a reprieve, a rebirth. You wander the dim passages of the castle, torchlight flickering along the walls. Alone, you think of your strange role. Few men could speak to a king in such ways and live. Yet you, dressed in bells and rags, wield a power both fragile and immense. You are a shadow counselor, a mirror with painted edges, a truth-teller hidden in nonsense. But the price of that role is constant fear. Every laugh is a reprieve. Every silence, a warning. You live not on bread or wine, but on the thin air of humor. As night falls, the castle changes. Torches glow along the battlements. Guards shift in their armor. And the halls quieten as nobles retreat to their chambers. You return to your own narrow room, little more than a cell with straw on the floor. You remove your cap, its bells still ringing faintly as if mocking your exhaustion. Lying upon the rough mattress, you stare at the ceiling beams. You wonder if tomorrow will bring laughter or wrath. You wonder if history will remember you, or if, like so many jesters, your name will vanish, swallowed by silence. And then you laugh quietly to yourself, alone in the dark. For perhaps that is the truest jest of all, that the one who makes kings laugh cannot even guarantee his own tomorrow. The night deepens, the castle sleeps. But somewhere, in the heavy silence, you feel the weight of your cap, even when it rests on the stool beside you. It is not cloth and bells. It is a crown of its own, kind, fragile, ridiculous, and deadly, and you, the fool, must wear it. The morning after your private audience with the king, the castle hums with gossip. Word travels faster than any messenger. Servants whisper in the kitchens, guards murmur at their posts. And even the noble ladies in their jeweled gowns trade sly glances as they pass through the corridors. They all know the jester was with the king last night, alone. Some wonder if you amused him. Some wonder if you angered him. All wonder why. For kings do not summon fools to private council unless there is reason. And in a court where reason is often twisted into intrigue, your presence is suddenly dangerous. When you enter the great hall, you feel the shift immediately. The air is thicker, the stairs sharper. Nobles in velvet and fur regard you not with amusement, but suspicion. A duke whispers to a bishop, who frowns. A knight narrows his eyes as you pass. They see not the fool's bells today, but the shadow of influence. And influence in a court of power is as perilous as poison. You bow low to the king as you always do. He smiles faintly, too faintly for others to judge whether it is favor or mockery. The courtiers notice everything. The king's smile becomes your burden. For if they believe you hold his ear, you become a rival, an obstacle, perhaps even a threat. You begin your performance for the hall. A jest about the weather, a rhyme about the cook's stew, a silly tumble that sends your cap bells ringing. Laughter trickles from the servants, polite chuckles from a few lords, but the louder sound is silence. Heavy, watchful silence. The courtiers are not in the mood to laugh. Not today. After the hall disperses, you slip into the gardens for air. The roses bloom bright, the fountains murmur softly, but even here you feel eyes upon you. Two knights linger nearby, speaking in low voices. They stop when you pass. You hear only fragments. The fool, last night. Too bold, your stomach tightens. This is the danger no one speaks of when they dream of standing near a throne. To amuse the king is one thing. To survive the envy of those who would take your place or fear your influence, that is another game entirely. Later, in the kitchens, a maid warns you quietly. Be careful, she says, her voice trembling. The Baron does not like you. He says the king listens too closely when you jest. He says fools should know their place. You thank her, though your heart sinks. The Baron ambitious, wealthy, ruthless is not a man whose anger you can afford. Yet how can you silence your bells? To stop jesting is to die. To jest too boldly is to die also. You live in the narrowest space between. That night, during a banquet, the Baron himself puts you to the test. He raises his goblet and calls across the hall. Fool! Tell us, what do you think of lords who spend their gold as swiftly as rain falls from the sky? The courtiers murmur, the question is bait. Everyone knows the Baron is mocked in whispers for his extravagance, his endless feasts, his jeweled horses, his towers built more for vanity than defense. To answer with silence would anger him. To answer with truth would condemn you. The king's eyes turn to you. The hall falls quiet. All wait for the fool's tongue. Your mind races. Then, with a bow, you reply, My lord, I think such men are wise indeed. For when the world ends, they shall be the only ones to greet the apocalypse with full bellies and golden chamber pots. The hall erupts in laughter. Even the king throws back his head, roaring with delight. The Baron forces a smile, though his eyes burn with fury. You have wounded him, and though hidden in humor, the cut was deep. The banquet continues, the music swells, the dancers whirl, but you know you have made an enemy. The Baron will not forget. Later, in your chamber, you sit on your straw bed, staring at the cap of bells resting on the stool. How strange, you think, that a few words dressed as jest can earn both laughter and hatred in the same breath. How strange, that a fool's tongue is sharper than a knight's sword, yet sharper blades draw blood. For in the days to come, you will find yourself not only balancing the king's laughter, but dodging the daggers of those who smile too sweetly while plotting your ruin. And in such a court, sometimes the greatest danger to a fool is not the crown above him, but the velvet shadows all around. The castle never truly sleeps. Even in the deepest hours of night, torches flicker along the battlements, guards pace with clinking armor, and the kitchens simmer with pots of broth for those who hunger after feasts. But in the silence between midnight and dawn, the castle breathes differently. It is a time of whispers. A time when secrets crawl through the corridors like smoke. Tonight, those whispers concern you. The Baron sits in his private chamber, surrounded by a circle of men loyal to his gold. His goblet of spiced wine trembles as he gestures angrily. The fool mocks me before the king, he snarls, and the king laughs. If a fool can humiliate a baron, what will he do next? No, I will not endure it. One of his knights, a tall, scarred man with a voice like gravel, leans closer. Shall we silence him, my lord? Accidents happen in dark hallways. The Baron hesitates. To slay a jester outright would be folly. Even a fool is protected by the king's laughter, and killing him would mean risking royal wrath. No subtler measures must be taken? Not yet, the Baron replies, lowering his voice. We shall let him laugh himself into the noose. All fools overstep eventually, and when he does, I will be there to whisper in the king's ear. The men nod, their faces grim in the flickering light. The game has begun. Unaware of this plotting, you wake the next morning to the usual stir of the castle. Yet something feels different. The glances last longer. The whispers grow quieter when you pass. Some servants avoid your gaze, while others look upon you with pity. Even the knights smirk more darkly. You sense the shift, though none speak it aloud. The Baron's shadow stretches over you. At midday, you are summoned to the hall for entertainment. The king sits upon his throne, his mood unreadable. The Baron stands close by, his jeweled cloak draped over his shoulders, his lips curled in a faint, triumphant smile. You bow low, your bells jingling, and begin your act. You tell a tale of a miserly lord who loved his gold so much he locked it in a tower. But one day, the tower collapsed under the weight of coins, burying him alive in the glittering heap. The hall laughs, some cautiously, some with genuine mirth. The king chuckles, pleased, but the Baron's eyes burn. He steps forward, raising his goblet. Fool, he says loudly, so all can hear, tell us a jest about loyalty? For what is a kingdom without it? The hall falls silent. You know the trap. Speak of false loyalty, and you risk angering the king. Speak of blind loyalty, and you insult the knights. You are being cornered, forced into a narrow path where every step is peril. You pause, smile, and bow. Then you answer, "My lord, loyalty is like a dog. It follows the man who feeds it best." But sometimes when the dog grows too fat, it forgets how to bite. The hall bursts into laughter. Even the king slaps the arm of his throne, grinning. The baron's forced smile tightens, his knuckles whitening on the goblet. He cannot show his fury before the king, but you can see it boiling beneath the surface. That night, in your chamber, you sit in darkness. Your cap of bells rests on the stool, but you do not touch it. You think instead of the baron's eyes, sharp as daggers, and the laughter that protected you for now, how long will it last? How many times can you turn his traps into jests before one misstep dooms you? For laughter is a fickle shield. It can deflect arrows today and fail tomorrow. In the quiet, you realize the truth. The king's amusement keeps you alive, but the courtier's envy may be the death of you. You are not merely balancing jokes, you are balancing survival against daggers drawn in shadows. And somewhere, in the halls of the castle, the baron whispers still. The year is 1347. The air inside the royal palace feels heavy with tension. For months, famine has been whispering through the countryside, and rumors of pestilence ride in with merchants from distant ports. But tonight, the king has decided that his court will not sit in silence, nor brood upon its troubles. Tonight is the Feast of Fools, the one night of the year when the world turns upside down. When bishops wear paper crowns and servants mock their masters, when laughter is no longer forbidden but demanded. For Jester, this is both salvation and danger. It is the one evening when your wit is measured not against another's, but against the chaos of the entire kingdom. The nobles, drunk on spiced wine, expect you to leap higher, tumble faster, and cut deeper with your words than any other night. The king expects nothing less than brilliance. And yet, should one jest turn sour, should one mimicry of his gait or his temper strike too close to the bone, your head may not rest easy on your shoulders by dawn. As the hall fills, you take your place in the shadows near the trestle tables, listening. The courtiers are already loosening their tongues. They mock the priests for their endless sermons and laugh at the merchants who cheat them at market. The king sits at the high table, his goblet of gold reflecting the torchlight, his face already red from wine. His mood is unpredictable. He has rewarded you before with purses heavy with silver. He has also threatened to have you flogged when your joke reminded him too much of the queen's sharp tongue. The feast begins with noise. Drums pound. Bells ring. The courtiers cheer as the Lord of Misrule, a low-born servant dressed in mock regalia, takes the king's throne for a moment, while the king pretends to kneel before him. The whole hall erupts in howls of laughter. For a few hours, the rigid order of the court is reversed, and you, the jester, are its true master of ceremony. You seize the moment. With a leap onto the table, you grab a roast pheasant, flap its wings like a bird, and squawk so loudly that the noble ladies cover their faces with their veils. Then, turning your eyes to the king, you mimic his habit of rubbing his belly after eating. The hall roars. Even the king's lips curl into a grin, for now you are safe. But behind the laughter, you feel the danger. The court loves you only as long as your wit feeds their hunger. They want more, sharper, crueler, riskier. One night calls for you to mimic the queen. Another demands you impersonate the Bishop of Canterbury. To refuse is to be branded a coward. To agree is to risk the wrath of those with power far greater than your own, so you tread the line. You play the fool, but every jest is calculated. You point your stick at the bishop's empty chair and say, "I hear he is absent, for he cannot bless bread while he himself is drunk on it." The courtiers explode with laughter, the kind of laughter that masks their fear. The bishop is not here to defend himself, so the joke is safe. The king laughs too, and you feel your chest loosen. But then he leans forward, his eyes glinting in the firelight, and says, "Now, fool, make us laugh at ourselves." The hall goes silent. It is the most dangerous request of all. To mock the courtiers to their faces, with the king watching for weakness in them, or disloyalty in you. You raise your bauble, the stick with its carved head, and in a voice just loud enough for the hall, you say, "My lords, my ladies, my king, tonight you play at being peasants, and peasants play at being kings. But tomorrow, when the bells toll, Who among you will still laugh when hunger gnaws at your table and pestilence scratches at your door? The silence holds for a moment too long. Then the king throws back his head and laughs, a booming sound that shakes the rafters. The hall follows, some with relief, others with trembling voices. You have survived the feast of fools, but as you bow, your heart whispers what your tongue dares not. You wonder how long laughter can keep the darkness at bay. The royal court thrived on spectacle, and nowhere was that more apparent than in the grand feasts. These gatherings were more than mere indulgence. They were theaters of politics, performances of wealth, and stages for silent power struggles. The hall itself was a marvel. Long wooden tables stretched under vaulted ceilings blackened with the smoke of centuries. Chandeliers dripping with wax cast a trembling light over polished goblets, silver platters, and roasted beasts stuffed with spices brought from distant lands. For most who attended, these feasts were a chance to watch the king display his dominance through food, wealth, and the company he kept. But for the jester, they were both opportunity and peril. You were expected to be the thread that stitched levity through the heavy cloth of politics. A quip at the right moment could make the entire hall erupt in laughter, earning you nods of approval. But a single misstep, a single jest poorly timed, could silence the room in a way that chilled the marrow of your bones. That night was the Feast of Shadows, an autumn tradition when the court gathered to mark the fading of the harvest and the encroaching of winter. The long tables sagged under the weight of venison, suckling pig, and candied fruits. Wine flowed freely, staining lips and loosening tongues. Nobles leaned into one another, trading gossip wrapped in laughter. The king sat on his raised dais, cloaked in crimson and fur, his face flushed with drink, yet his eyes as sharp as daggers. He laughed loudly, but behind the mirth lurked a predator's calculation. Your role was to keep him entertained, but not only him. The nobles craned their necks to see what you might do next. You juggled apples from the table, spinning them in dizzying arcs until one burst apart, showering its juice across the nearest lord. The hall roared with laughter except for the lord himself, whose sour expression could curdle milk. Quickly you seized the moment, bowing low and declaring, "Forgive me, my lord. I thought to share with you the sweetness that so often escapes your lips." The jab was daring, but the timing perfect. The hall howled, and even the king slapped his thigh, delighting in the nobleman's humiliation. But you knew what they did not, that every joke came at a cost. The noble would remember, his pride bruised. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but at some whispered council, he might plant a seed against you. That was the double-edged sword of wit. It could lift you higher than any knight-s blade, but it could also cut you down just as swiftly. The night grew darker, the fires lower, and the games crueler. Nobles, drunk on wine and boredom, demanded more from you. One shouted for a story, another for a song, while a third tossed a bone at your feet like you were nothing more than a hound. You spun into a tale, weaving together absurdity and satire, carefully balancing on the razor's edge of offense. Your voice rose and fell, imitating lords and ladies until the courtiers wheezed with laughter. Yet your eyes kept flicking to the king, measuring every twitch of his mouth, every shift of his brow. Then came the danger. A noble, emboldened by drink, demanded you mock the king himself. The hall hushed instantly, the kind of silence that weighs heavier than stone. Every gaze turned to you. Your heart pounded, but you painted a grin across your face. To refuse was impossible, it would appear cowardly. To insult the king outright was to invite death. So you danced between the blades. With exaggerated gestures, you began mimicking the king's hunting habits, stumbling, missing every shot, until you collapsed in a heap with a goose feather in your cap. The crowd erupted, some with genuine mirth, others with nervous laughter. The king's eyes bore into you. For a heartbeat, the hall teetered on the brink of disaster. Then the king threw back his head and roared, his laughter booming louder than all others. Relief flooded the room in your veins. You had survived again, though you felt as though you had gambled away years of your life in that single moment. When the feast dwindled into drunken revelry, the king's fool was often the last to leave. Nobles slumped against tables, goblets clattered to the floor, and the great hall echoed with snores. You lingered, alone with the dregs of wine and the fading firelight. In these moments, the mask slipped. Your painted face, your jingling bells, your endless grin, they all fell away, leaving only the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who lived on the edge of another's pleasure. Did they know how fragile your world was? Did they understand that every jest was weighed, every word tested, every gesture calculated? Perhaps not. To them, you were nothing more than a brightly clad fool, a curiosity to be prodded and mocked. But to you, survival demanded more cunning than any general strategy. You played a game where the rules shifted with the king's mood, and the prize for losing was your head on the block. And yet there was a strange power in it. You could say things others dared not. Cloaked in laughter, you spoke truths that no lord or bishop would utter. You saw the raw underbelly of the court, and at times you could steer it. The Feast of Shadows proved it once again. You were both puppet and puppeteer, slave and sovereign, walking a line so thin it could snap at any moment. As dawn's pale light crept through the stained glass, you dragged yourself to your quarters, the echoes of laughter still ringing in your ears. You had survived another feast. But survival was all it was, and in the Court of Kings, survival was never guaranteed tomorrow. The morning after the Feast of Shadows, the castle feels different. Torches flicker dimly in the corridors as though the walls themselves are wary. Courtiers whisper behind screens of velvet and lace. Even the servants, who once laughed freely at your antics, now steal nervous glances as you pass. You feel it, the Baron's shadow, stretching through the halls like smoke. He is plotting. The Baron, tall and imposing, gathers a circle of loyal knights and advisors in his private chambers. Their conversation is hushed, punctuated by the occasional clink of goblets. "The fool oversteps," the Baron hisses, and the king laughs. "We cannot allow this." One knight, scarred from battles past, leans forward. "Shall we attack him openly, my lord?" The Baron shakes his head. "No, to strike the Jester directly would be madness. The king would never forgive it. No, we must be subtler. We shall set traps for him so that the next jest he makes fails and the king sees him as unworthy. The plan is insidious. Poisoned jokes, misleading prompts from nobles, arranged situations where the Jester must humiliate someone who should not be mocked, each carefully designed to make him stumble. You, the fool, remain blissfully unaware, preparing for your next performance as if yesterday's laughter guarantees nothing. In the great hall, the Baron greets you with an unnatural smile. "Fool," he says, his voice sweet but dripping with menace, "the king wishes to see your wit this morning. Perhaps you may amuse us with a tale about loyalty. Every word is calculated. Loyalty is a knife. Speak of blind loyalty, and you may offend the knights. Speak of deceit, and the Baron will twist it into treachery. Yet refusal is unthinkable. You bow low, the bells of your cap jingling faintly, hiding the storm inside. You choose a tale carefully. A story of a servant who followed his master faithfully, even when the master's decisions led to ruin, but who secretly held the master's secrets, balancing honesty with survival." The court chuckles politely. The king leans forward, eyes sharp. You feel the precarious tension. This is a test, and you know it. The Baron's lips twitch, half smile, half sneer. He knows the Jester has skirted the trap this time, but his eyes betray fury. He whispers to a nearby noble, who nods subtly, setting the stage for a future pitfall. Every move in this castle is a game of shadows, and the Jester's dance grows ever more dangerous. As the day continues, you weave through corridors and courtyards, performing small tricks, chatting with servants, testing the Baron's traps without fully knowing them. You understand one truth. Every laugh earned is borrowed time. Every grin the king bestows is temporary protection. Survival requires more than humor. It demands cunning, observation, and the ability to vanish into shadows when necessary. That evening you retreat to your quarters, exhausted but alert. You remove your cap of bells, running your fingers over its stitched edges. The Jester's mask is gone now, but the weight of the day remains. The Baron's plots are invisible, yet omnipresent. You realize that the true danger of the court is not the king's displeasure. It is the envy and ambition that lurk in silk and velvet, waiting to strike when your guard slips. Outside, the night is cold. Torches cast long shadows along the walls, and the castle seems to hold its breath. Somewhere in the darkness, the Baron smiles, planning his next move. You cannot see him, but you can feel the currents of intrigue moving through the stone halls, wrapping the court in tension. The life of a jester is a life on the edge. Every day, every laugh, every story carries risk. Yet you continue because survival demands it, and because, in truth, there is power in laughter. Even as enemies plot in silence, you hold sway over the most unpredictable and dangerous man in the kingdom, the king himself. And so you steel yourself for the coming days, knowing that each jest, each tumble, each witty remark is not merely performance, it is a gamble with life. A tightrope walk over a pit of daggers hidden beneath the court's laughter. The bells of your cap jingle faintly as you lie down on the straw mattress in your quarters. Sleep comes fitfully, shadowed by the certainty that tomorrow the Baron will strike again, and your wit, your charm, your very life may be tested like never before. The castle had grown eerily quiet that morning, as though even the stones themselves were holding their breath. Courtiers moved like shadows along the corridors, whispers sliding from one chamber to the next, carrying rumors and subtle threats. You, the jester, felt the weight of every eye upon you, though many were unseen. The Baron's shadow hung heavy, stretching far beyond his private chambers, brushing against every corner of the castle. The king had summoned you to the great hall, a rare occurrence at this hour. Typically, the hall was empty in the morning, a place for servants to clean and nobles to whisper. But today, the hall was set with empty chairs, tables polished to a gleam, and tapestries that seemed to watch you as you entered. The Baron stood near the dais, his cloak gleaming in the morning light, lips curled into a smile that promised trouble. "My fool," the king said, his voice calm but commanding, "entertain us." You bowed, bells jingling faintly. You sensed immediately that this was no ordinary test. The nobles around the hall fidgeted in their seats. They had all received discreet instructions, you could tell. Some leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the arms of their chairs. Others, more cautious, pretended to sip from goblets, eyes flicking toward the Baron for cues. Then the Baron spoke. "Tell us a tale," he said, his voice syrupy, "of loyalty and folly, but make it personal." Your stomach dropped. Personal stories in a court rife with spies, ambition, and envy were like walking through a hall of knives blindfolded. One wrong word, one ill-timed laugh, and you could become the target of everyone's wrath. And yet, refusal would be interpreted as insolence, a crime punishable by whipping, imprisonment, or worse. You smiled, masking your fear behind the painted grin. "As you wish, my lord," you said, stepping closer to the dais. You began with a story about a king who trusted his advisors blindly. He laughed at every suggestion, rewarding them with gold, and never realized that a shadow grew beneath the throne, stretching silently, waiting for a misstep. The nobles chuckled nervously. Some leaned forward, hanging on every word. Even the king's lips twitched, but then the Baron raised a hand. "Tell us how the king himself would fare in such a tale," he said, his eyes glinting with menace. The hall went silent. Even the servants paused in their work. All attention was on you. This was the trap the bait had been set. If you mocked the king too harshly, he might see insult rather than jest. Too timid, and the Baron would twist it into failure, casting doubt on your wit and loyalty. You took a deep breath and wove the story carefully. You described the king as a man with the wisdom of eagles and the patience of stones, yet prone to moments of human folly. You mimicked the gestures of a ruler pondering decisions, nodding, frowning, and then scratching his head in confusion over trivial matters. The courtiers gasped at your daring, but the king laughed. A low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the stone walls. The nobles laughed too, though some with unease, realizing that the jester had turned the trap into a mirror, reflecting the king's quirks in a way that entertained rather than insulted. The Baron's forced smile tightened, the only sign of his growing fury. He whispered to a knight, who nodded subtly, plotting another strike. You knew the danger was far from over. The Baron's plan was patient. Every jest you performed, every laugh you drew, was being measured, analyzed. One misstep would give him the chance to strike. You realized that in this castle, survival depended not only on wit, but on constant vigilance, reading the currents of envy, ambition, and fear. As the performance continued, you danced between laughter and peril. You juggled goblets, mimicked the servants, sang songs of ridiculous kings, and tumbled with exaggerated clumsiness. Each act was a calculated risk, and each chuckle from the audience was a lifeline. Yet beneath every laugh you felt the Baron's gaze, cold and calculating. He would not stop. He would wait for a moment of weakness, a stumble, a missed cue, a misjudged word to turn the court against you. By the time the morning sun reached the stained glass windows, you had survived another trial. The king's laughter still echoed in your ears, a reminder that life and death balanced on a thread thinner than any rope. But you knew the Baron would not relent. He had tasted the danger you represented, and now he would seek to control it or destroy it. That evening, as you removed your bells and cap, exhaustion weighed heavily on you. The straw mattress beneath you offered little comfort. Outside, torches flickered in the wind, casting elongated shadows along the castle walls. Somewhere the Baron smiled, plotting his next move. And you, the fool, realized once again that every laugh, every story, every performance was a gamble with your very life. The life of a court jester was not just about humor. It was a tightrope walk between amusement and execution, a delicate dance in a court where envy and ambition hid behind every smile. And as sleep finally claimed you, one thought remained. Tomorrow, the Baron would strike again, and your wit, your courage, and your survival would all be tested like never before. The morning dawned pale and gray, mist curling along the castle's stone walls like silent serpents. The courtiers moved about with quiet unease. Even the birds in the courtyard seemed to whisper warnings. You, the jester, could feel that something had shifted. The Baron's schemes were no longer rumors. Today, they would be set in motion. The king summoned you to the hall early, claiming a special audience before breakfast. You approached, bells jingling softly, masking the pounding of your heart. The hall was empty save for the king, the Baron, and a few carefully chosen nobles whose loyalty to the Baron was unquestionable. They had been briefed, you suspected, to watch every move, every word, every gesture. "My fool," the king said, his tone deceptively calm. "I wish to hear a story of courage, but make it lively, make it daring, make it unforgettable." You bowed low, and the Baron's lips twitched ever so slightly, an almost invisible signal of his delight. This was the trap. You would be forced to perform a tale that had layers, subtleties, and consequences. Fail, and the Baron would seize the moment to undermine you. You began your story, a tale of a knight who faced impossible odds, fighting not for gold or glory, but for the honor of those who could not defend themselves. The knights around the hall nodded politely. The king's eyes narrowed in focus. Your performance was precise, exaggerated just enough to entertain, yet careful not to insult any noble in the room. But the Baron had one last twist. Midway through, he pointed to a young nobleman in the hall. "Make this knight resemble our own Lord Darwin," he said slyly, "so that we may see courage in our midst." Your stomach turned. Lord Darwin was not known for bravery. He was cowardly, cruel to his servants, and quick to anger. To cast him as a hero would insult him directly, risking the wrath of a man with powerful connections. To ignore the instruction would be interpreted as insolence, a failure in wit. You swallowed and wove the narrative carefully. The knight Darwin in your story was brave, but not without flaw. He faltered, stumbled, and nearly fell in battle, only to rise through wit and cunning rather than sheer strength. You exaggerated his cowardice in subtle ways, hiding the mockery beneath humor, so that only those paying close attention would recognize the critique. The hall erupted in laughter, some from genuine amusement, others nervous at the cleverness of your tale. The king chuckled, leaning forward, clearly entertained. But the Baron's eyes glimmered with fury. The trap had not fully succeeded. You had danced on the edge of the knife and emerged intact, yet barely. The Baron did not retreat. Later that evening he set his second, more insidious plan. A dinner was prepared with exotic dishes, each one strange and unfamiliar. The Baron whispered to the cooks, instructing them to create a subtle, unpleasant taste in one dish, knowing the king might request the jester to sample it first. The trap was perfect. If you reacted with disgust, you would offend the king. If you swallowed the taste, the nobles would mock you behind your back for cowardice. When the dish arrived, you smiled and bowed, lifting the first bite gracefully. The flavor was foul, but your face remained a mask of delight. You exaggerated the joy in your expressions, describing each bite with flowery praise and theatrical appreciation. The hall laughed, the king clapped, and the baron's forced grin tightened further. You had survived another trap, but the tension was palpable. Each day in the castle was a gauntlet. Every laugh was borrowed time. You realized that the baron's schemes would only grow more intricate, more dangerous, and that one slip, one miscalculated joke could spell your doom. As you retired to your quarters that night, you removed your cap of bells, feeling the weight of the day settle like stone upon your shoulders. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the faint laughter of servants and the echo of past feasts. Somewhere the baron planned his next move, patiently, meticulously, like a spider waiting for its prey to stumble. And you, the jester, understood a truth that had become the center of your existence. In this castle, wit was survival. Laughter was armor, and every day was a perilous game of shadows where the wrong note could cost your life. The day began like any other, with the cold wind sweeping through the stone corridors of the castle, and the faint scent of burned torches lingering in the halls. But you, the jester, felt the tension before you even stepped into the great hall. Whispers clung to the walls like ivy, shadows moved where no one stood, and you knew without seeing that the baron was behind it. This time the trap was not subtle. The baron had orchestrated a spectacle for the entire court, a challenge of humor meant to expose you. The king had agreed, his eyes glinting with curiosity. What he did not know, and what the baron intended, was that failure would embarrass you in a way that made you vulnerable to the court's envy and the baroness' machinations. The hall was filled to the brim. Noble families, knights, and advisors packed the benches, all eager for amusement. Torches flickered along the walls, casting a dancing light across the tapestries and polished floors. You could hear the distant murmur of servants, the soft clink of goblets, and the occasional cough from someone nervous about the coming performance. "My fool," the king said, leaning forward on the dais, "today you shall entertain all. A contest of wit and cleverness awaits. Make us laugh, or—" He let the sentence trail off, leaving its threat heavy in the air. The baron, seated near the king, smiled as if already tasting your defeat. He had prepared a series of ridiculous challenges, improvisation games, riddles that had no solution, and orders from nobles to mock themselves and each other, all designed to force the jester into error. The nobles' eyes sparkled with anticipation, their amusement tinted with cruelty. You began cautiously, juggling apples and mimicking the clumsy antics of the court's most pompous knights. The hall erupted in laughter, some forced, some genuine, but the baron's eyes narrowed. He whispered to a knight who leaned over to disrupt one of your props, sending an apple tumbling into a guest's goblet. The guest shrieked, wine splashing, and gasps filled the hall. You froze for only a heartbeat, then turned the mishap into comedy. Bowing deeply, you proclaimed, "Ah, my lord, it seems the apple has declared its own loyalty to the wine rather than the hand that guides it." The hall burst into laughter again, including the king, who clapped his hands in delight. The baron's teeth ground behind his smile. Next, the baron instructed the nobles to offer you riddles with impossible answers. One riddle demanded that you name the exact number of steps the king took in a day. Another asked for a tale that was simultaneously tragic and hilarious. You danced between the traps, weaving your responses with wit and careful observation. You exaggerated gestures, twisted words, and drew attention to your own bumbling as a shield against criticism. But the baroness' ultimate plan was the cruelest. He had placed a young noble in a mock predicament and demanded you improvise a rescue, making the noble appear heroic while also entertaining the king. The young lord was foolish and stubborn, failing repeatedly, providing you little material for comedy. You had to think quickly. With a series of exaggerated motions, tripping over furniture and using your bells to punctuate each mishap, you crafted a story in which the noble's failures became the highlight of the act, and his supposed heroism appeared as an absurd farce. The hall roared with laughter. Even the king leaned back in his chair, slapping the dais in amusement. The baron's jaw tightened, and his hand twitched as if to strike, but he dared not. You had survived yet again. Exhausted but triumphant, you retreated to your quarters after the spectacle. Your body ached, your face itched from the makeup, and your mind spun with the realization that this was only the beginning. The Baron would not stop. He had tasted your resilience, and now he would escalate, seeking a moment when your wit might fail and your life could hang by the slimmest thread. Outside, the evening wind howled through the castle's towers, carrying with it the faint echoes of laughter and whispers of envy. You lay down, bells at your side, and thought of the perilous days to come. Each jest, each tumble, each word spoken in the hall was no longer mere entertainment. It was survival, a life measured by the king's amusement and by your ability to outwit the shadows that lurked in silk and velvet. In the world of the court, the line between laughter and death was razor-thin. And you, the jester, walked it with every step. The castle had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Torches flickered along the stone corridors, casting long shadows that crept like living things. Courtiers moved through the halls in whispered conversations, glances darting toward you as though weighing your survival. You, the jester, could feel the tension pressing against your chest like iron bands. The Baron had tasted your resilience in the public humiliation challenge, and now his schemes were personal. That morning, a note arrived at your quarters, sealed with the Baron's signet. You knew before breaking it that it was a trap. The message contained a challenge. You were to entertain the king at the upcoming banquet with a tale that contained truth, humor, and subtle flattery, all delivered without offense. Simple enough in theory, deadly in execution. Every word would be analyzed, every gesture measured. Fail, and the Baron would ensure that the consequences were severe. When you entered the hall, the atmosphere was tense. The nobles were gathered, their eyes glinting with anticipation, the servants hushed and careful. The Baron's smirk was faint but unmistakable, a predator confident in his design. You bowed low, bells jingling softly, and began your tale. Your story opened innocently, a simple fable of a king, his court, and a foolish jester who learned the value of observation. Yet beneath the surface you wove in hints of critique, the king's impatience, the noble's vanity, the subtle corruption in the court. The story was a delicate dance, designed to amuse while skirting offense. Halfway through, the Baron interrupted. "Make the tale of the jester include Lord Darwin," he commanded, "so we may see the fool's cleverness tested." Your stomach dropped. Lord Darwin, proud and vain, was sensitive to mockery, but you knew refusal was impossible. You had to craft a narrative that highlighted his flaws without insulting him outright. With a flourish, you described a clumsy knight who stumbles yet achieves success through cunning, exaggerating Darwin's missteps with humor while preserving his dignity. The hall erupted in laughter. Even the king chuckled. The Baron's smile tightened into a line of fury. But the Baron was not finished. As the banquet progressed, he sent servants with poisoned dishes, not literal poison, a flavor so unpleasant that any reaction would risk embarrassment. You tasted each bite carefully, maintaining a facade of delight, exaggerating the culinary experience into a comedic display. The hall laughed again, the king clapped, and the Baron's eyes blazed with frustration. Every moment was a battle. You realized that the Baron's vendetta would escalate, that the next trap could be far deadlier. Perhaps a public insult disguised as a jest, or a riddle designed to humiliate you. You understood that your survival depended not just on wit, but on constant vigilance, on reading subtle cues, and on the ability to improvise under extreme pressure. As night fell, the castle grew silent. You retired to your quarters, stripped of bells and makeup, your body aching from the day's performances. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the faint laughter of servants and the echo of courtly intrigue. You lay awake, knowing that the Baron's vendetta was far from over, and that every joke, every gesture, every laugh was a fragile shield against the dangers lurking in silk, velvet, and ambition. In the world of the court, wit was survival, laughter was armor, and every day was a perilous dance on a blade's edge. And you, the jester, had to walk it carefully, lest a single misstep end not only your performance, but your very life. The castle had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Torches flickered along the stone corridors, casting long shadows that crept like living things. Courtiers moved through the halls in whispered conversations, glances darting toward you as though weighing your survival. You, the jester, could feel the tension pressing against your chest like iron bands. The Baron had tasted your resilience in the public humiliation challenge, and now his schemes were personal. That morning, a note arrived at your quarters, sealed with the Baron's signet. You knew before breaking it that it was a trap. The message contained a challenge. You were to entertain the king at the upcoming banquet with a tale that contained truth, humor, and subtle flattery, all delivered without offense. Simple enough in theory, deadly in execution. Every word would be analyzed, every gesture measured. Fail, and the Baron would ensure that the consequences were severe. When you entered the hall, the atmosphere was tense. The nobles were gathered, their eyes glinting with anticipation, the servants hushed and careful. The Baron's smirk was faint but unmistakable, a predator confident in his design. You bowed low, bells jingling softly, and began your tale. Your story opened innocently, a simple fable of a king, his court, and a foolish jester who learned the value of observation. Yet beneath the surface, you wove in hints of critique, the king's impatience, the noble's vanity, the subtle corruption in the court. The story was a delicate dance, designed to amuse while skirting offense. Halfway through, the Baron interrupted. "Make the tale of the jester include Lord Darwin," he commanded, "so we may see the fool's cleverness tested." Your stomach dropped. Lord Darwin, proud and vain, was sensitive to mockery, but you knew refusal was impossible. You had to craft a narrative that highlighted his flaws without insulting him outright. With a flourish, you described a clumsy knight who stumbles yet achieves success through cunning, exaggerating Darwin's missteps with humor while preserving his dignity. The hall erupted in laughter. Even the king chuckled. The Baron's smile tightened into a line of fury. But the Baron was not finished. As the banquet progressed, he sent servants with poisoned dishes, not literal poison, but flavors so unpleasant that any reaction would risk embarrassment. You tasted each bite carefully, maintaining a facade of delight, exaggerating the culinary experience into a comedic display. The hall laughed again, the king clapped, and the Baron's eyes blazed with frustration. Every moment was a battle. You realized that the Baron's vendetta would escalate, that the next trap could be far deadlier. Perhaps a public insult disguised as a jest, or a riddle designed to humiliate you. You understood that your survival depended not just on wit, but on constant vigilance, on reading subtle cues, and on the ability to improvise under extreme pressure. As night fell, the castle grew silent. You retired to your quarters, stripped of bells and makeup, your body aching from the day's performances. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the faint laughter of servants and the echo of courtly intrigue. You lay awake, knowing that the Baron's vendetta was far from over, and that every joke, every gesture, every laugh was a fragile shield against the dangers lurking in silk, velvet, and ambition. In the world of the court, wit was survival, laughter was armor, and every day was a perilous dance on a blade's edge. And you, the jester, had to walk it carefully, lest a single misstep end not only your performance, but your very life. The castle seemed almost alive that morning, its stone walls echoing the secrets of countless plots. Every corridor felt like a snare, every whisper a warning. You, the jester, knew instinctively that the Baron's vendetta was about to escalate further. His previous traps had tested your wit and composure, but today's challenge promised to test your agility, cunning, and ability to improvise under unbearable pressure. The king summoned you to a special audience in the courtyard, where servants had arranged a labyrinth of ropes, barrels, and platforms, an obstacle course disguised as entertainment. "You will amuse us," the king commanded, "by navigating this course while keeping your humor intact." On the surface, it appeared playful, but you recognized the danger immediately. Every misstep could humiliate you before the entire court, giving the Baron the chance to undermine your standing. The nobles lined the perimeter, whispering and laughing quietly, eager for your failure. The Baron's smile was faint but unmistakable, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of seeing you falter. You took a deep breath, balancing carefully atop the first platform. Your bells jingled softly with each step, echoing against the walls of the courtyard. The first challenge was a set of uneven barrels. You hopped from one to the next, exaggerating your movements, tumbling just enough to elicit laughter without truly losing balance. The audience laughed heartily, and the king clapped his hands in delight. Then came the next obstacle, a series of ropes hung at varying heights, requiring you to swing across gaps without falling. You gripped them tightly, performing exaggerated leaps, twirling in the air as if dancing with invisible partners. Every motion was calculated, too cautious, and it would appear dull. Too reckless, and you risked injury or ridicule. Yet the Baron watched intently, waiting for a slip. Midway through, a disguised trap was triggered. A bucket of water tipped unexpectedly above your head, soaking you from head to toe. Gasps and laughter filled the courtyard. You used the mishap to your advantage, pretending to slip and slide across the platforms with comedic flair. The audience erupted in laughter again, the king's eyes twinkling with amusement. The final obstacle was the most dangerous, a tightrope stretched over a shallow pit, lined with nobles whose expressions ranged from amusement to subtle malice. Every step required precision, balance, and timing. You inched forward, arms outstretched, bells jingling softly. Below, the Baron whispered instructions to a few loyal knights, attempting to rattle you with small tricks, blowing air, dropping objects, and whispering distractions. You adjusted, improvising, turning each distraction into part of your performance. When a knight tossed a feather, you pretended to struggle under its weight, exaggerating your expressions and movements. The nobles laughed, some clapping, while the king leaned forward, clearly entertained. Finally, with a dramatic leap, you reached the end of the tightrope, tumbling safely onto the platform and bowing deeply. The courtyard erupted into applause. The king's laughter echoed across the walls, genuine and approving. The Baron's forced smile betrayed his frustration. His intricate trap had failed to harm you. Exhausted, soaked, and exhilarated, you retreated to your quarters. Every muscle ached, but you felt alive. The labyrinth had tested more than your humor. It had tested your resilience, your agility, and your ability to think several steps ahead. Yet, as you lay on your straw mattress, the wind whispering through the towers, you knew the Baron's vendetta was far from over. He had failed today, but the court was full of shadows, full of ambition and envy, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. You realized that surviving as a jester was not just about laughter, it was about constant vigilance, strategy, and the ability to transform every trap into entertainment. In the castle, wit was survival, laughter was armor, and every day was a perilous dance along a razor's edge. And you, the jester, had proven that even in the most intricate trap, the fool could prevail if only for a moment. The castle had grown colder, not in temperature but in atmosphere. Whispers seemed sharper, glances lingered longer, and every smile carried an undertone of suspicion. You, the jester, sensed the shift immediately. The Baron's vendetta had evolved. No longer were his attacks merely physical or performative. Today, he sought to undermine your mind, your confidence, and the very foundation of your humor. The king summoned you for a private performance in the council chamber, a place usually reserved for solemn deliberations. The chamber was dimly lit, tapestries absorbing the light, shadows forming strange patterns along the walls. Only the Baron, a few loyal nobles, and the king were present. "My fool," the king began, voice calm yet commanding, "entertain us. Make us laugh, but do so with subtlety and wisdom." On the surface, it was a simple request, but you sensed the trap. The Baron had prepared questions designed to confuse, puzzles meant to humiliate, and prompts that would test every skill you had honed. The slightest hesitation could be twisted into failure. You began with a story, a tale of a clever fox and a proud lion, a classic fable you had adapted countless times. But as you spoke, the Baron interrupted subtly, asking questions mid-narrative, forcing you to improvise. "What would the fox do if the lion betrayed him?" he asked slyly. Explain without offending either party. Your heart pounded. Every word had to entertain. Answer the Baron's question and avoid insult. You weaved your narrative carefully, turning the fox's cunning into humor, exaggerating the lion's pride just enough to provoke laughter without disrespecting the king's authority, who often identified with such regal imagery. The nobles chuckled politely, some leaning forward to catch every nuance. The king's eyes twinkled, clearly amused. But you noticed the baron's gaze, sharp and calculating, waiting for a crack in your composure. Then came the subtle cruelty. The baron had arranged for a series of riddles, each seemingly simple but impossible to answer fully. One involved a paradox about loyalty, another asked you to describe a noble without mentioning their most obvious traits. Each challenge was designed to confuse, to make you falter publicly. You responded with quick thinking, turning each paradox into a humorous anecdote, exaggerating gestures, twisting words, and emphasizing your own foolishness as a shield. The audience laughed, and the king leaned back, satisfied. Yet you knew this was only temporary. By mid-performance, the baron introduced the psychological element. He whispered subtle comments to the nobles, planting seeds of doubt. "Notice how he hesitates," he murmured. "Is he clever or merely lucky?" The whispers reached your ears despite the distance. You paused, just slightly, and immediately felt the pressure. The mind games were working. The court was watching not just for humor, but for weakness. You adjusted, exaggerating the pause into a theatrical moment, making it seem deliberate, turning potential failure into suspenseful entertainment. The nobles laughed once more, some nervously, some genuinely, and the king's eyes gleamed with amusement. The session lasted hours, each moment a tightrope walk between humor and disaster. By the end, you were exhausted, your mind spinning from the constant vigilance required to turn every trap into entertainment. The baron's plans had tested you as never before, probing your confidence, resilience, and adaptability. When you finally returned to your quarters, your body ached and your mind was heavy, but you knew you had survived. The baron's psychological warfare had failed for now, but you also knew it would escalate. The court was a labyrinth of ambition, envy, and hidden malice, and every day was a test of wit, courage, and composure. As you lay down, bells and cap set aside, the flickering torchlight casting shadows along the walls, you realized one truth: survival as a court jester required more than humor. It required cunning, observation, and the ability to turn even the darkest schemes into a performance. And in the castle of the king, wit was the only weapon that could protect you from the ever-watchful baron. The castle buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread through the corridors like wildfire. The jester was to perform for the entire court in a grand spectacle, a performance meant to amuse, but designed by the baron to humiliate you utterly. The nobles, eager to witness your failure, filled the great hall hours before the performance. Torches glimmered against the polished stone, and tapestries swayed gently as though watching, breathing with the anticipation of the court. You entered, cap of bells jingling faintly, your painted grin carefully maintained. The king's eyes twinkled, clearly eager for entertainment, but you could sense the tension. Even the servants moved cautiously, glancing nervously at the nobles who had been briefed by the baron to watch your every move. "My fool," the king said, "today you shall perform a tale of wisdom and humor combined. Let us see your cleverness shine." The baron's smile was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried an unmistakable promise of mischief. He had prepared a series of staged mishaps, falling props, staged insults from nobles, and riddles designed to confuse and embarrass you in front of the king. The first obstacle was simple, a mock duel with a clumsy knight, where your movements had to be precise to avoid real injury while appearing ridiculous. You began cautiously, using exaggerated gestures to amplify the humor. A stumble here, a fall there, every movement calculated to entertain while avoiding real harm. The hall erupted with laughter, yet you could feel the baron's eyes piercing through the performance, searching for weakness. Next came the riddles. Nobles called out challenges, each more convoluted than the last. One demanded you reveal a hidden truth about the court without offending anyone. Another asked you to imitate the king's own quirks subtly. You twisted your words, exaggerated your expressions, and danced along the fine line between humor and insult. The audience laughed, some nervously, some genuinely, while the king leaned forward, clapping in delight. But the baron's ultimate plan was the cruelest, a staged insult from a young noble, designed to provoke a response that would humiliate you. The noble's words were sharp, mocking your wit and courage. The hall fell silent, every eye fixed upon you. One wrong move, one harsh word, and your standing with the king could collapse instantly. You hesitated for a heartbeat, feeling the tension crush against your chest. Then, with a deep breath, you transformed the insult into comedy. Bowing low, you exaggerated the noble's foolishness, making the mockery appear as harmless jest rather than personal attack. The hall erupted into laughter once more, the king clapping in genuine amusement. The baron's smile tightened into a thin line of frustration. The performance continued with escalating challenges, juggling flaming torches, improvising songs about the nobles, and performing acrobatic feats across the hall. Each act was a delicate balance between humor, danger, and the ever-present threat of the baron's schemes. You danced, tumbled, and spoke with precision, turning potential traps into moments of comedy and delight. By the end of the performance, sweat soaked your costume, your muscles ached, and your mind was exhausted. Yet you had survived. The king's laughter echoed through the hall, a sound of approval that temporarily lifted the weight of danger. The baron, however, retreated into the shadows, plotting his next move with quiet fury. That evening, as you removed your cap and bells, you reflected on the day's trials. Each laugh had been earned through careful calculation. Each smile had been a shield against peril. The castle was a labyrinth of intrigue, ambition, and envy, and the baron was patient, waiting for a moment when your wit might fail. You lay down, exhausted but alive, understanding that your role as a jester was far more than entertainment. It was survival, strategy, and constant vigilance. Each day was a test, each jest a gamble, and every laugh was a lifeline in a court where ambition and envy lurked behind every corner. The life of a court jester was perilous, unpredictable, and exhausting, but for now you had survived. And you knew that tomorrow the baron would return with a new scheme, one that would push your wit, courage, and very existence to the limit. The castle corridors were quieter than usual, the usual chatter replaced by a tense hush. Even the wind seemed to move cautiously, as though aware of the baron's schemes. You, the jester, sensed the change immediately. The baron had shifted tactics once again. No longer relying solely on performance or public humiliation, he sought to entangle you in a web of lies, deception, and subtle treachery that could end your career or your life if mismanaged. That morning, a messenger arrived at your quarters bearing a cryptic note. The baron had sent an invitation to meet him privately in the castle library, claiming to share a secret opportunity to entertain the king in a new and unprecedented way. You knew instinctively that any meeting alone with him could be dangerous. A single misstep, a poorly chosen word, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Despite your instincts, you entered the library, cap jingling softly. The baron stood beside a table stacked with documents, maps, and letters. His smile was calm, controlled, but there was a gleam of menace in his eyes. "You are clever, fool," he said, "and that is precisely why I need your cooperation." He outlined a scheme that required you to deliver messages to various nobles under the guise of jest, to relay secret information as part of a performance for the king. The task appeared innocuous, even flattering, but beneath the surface lay traps. Each noble had been instructed to test you, misinterpret your words, and report any error directly to the baron. One wrong statement, one misjudged tone, and your standing with the king could crumble. You had to navigate the castle with care, delivering messages cloaked in humor, improvising your tone, and performing physical comedy to mask the true content. Every step was measured, every gesture calculated. One misstep could unravel the entire web, leaving you vulnerable to the baron's schemes. As you moved through the halls, the nobles reacted in ways designed to confuse. Some mocked you subtly, others praised you too loudly, creating doubt in your mind. You countered with improvisation, turning ridicule into entertainment, exaggerating your movements and expressions to ensure laughter, not suspicion. Midway through your rounds, the baron introduced a psychological twist. He instructed one noble to falsely accuse you of insulting another, hoping to create tension and force a defensive response that might appear insubordinate. You responded with calm wit, twisting the accusation into a joke about misunderstandings, highlighting the absurdity without directly denying it, maintaining the king's favor while deflecting potential harm. By the end of the day, you had delivered every message, navigated every trap, and turned the Baron's web into a performance that entertained the court. Laughter rang out in the halls, and the king's approval was evident. But the Baron's presence loomed, patient and dangerous. He had failed to ensnare you this time, but his plan was far from over. As night fell, you retreated to your quarters, drained and wary. Each day, you realized, required not only wit and humor, but careful calculation, observation, and strategy. Every interaction, every gesture, every word spoken in the castle could be weaponized against you. The Baron's web was vast, and escaping it meant thinking several steps ahead at all times. The bells at your side jingled faintly as you lay down. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying echoes of laughter, envy, and plotting. The castle was a labyrinth not only of stone, but of ambition and danger, and the jester's life depended on navigating it with precision. In the shadowy world of the court, laughter was armor, wit was a weapon, and survival demanded constant vigilance. And you, the fool, had once again turned a trap into triumph, though you knew the Baroness' web would continue to tighten with each passing day. The castle corridors felt colder than ever. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the stone walls, carrying whispers of doubt and intrigue. You, the jester, moved carefully, each step measured, each bell's jingle a subtle declaration of presence. The Baron's schemes had evolved again. No longer confined to traps, riddles, or psychological games, he now sought to manipulate allies, turn friends into enemies, and isolate you within the court itself. The day began with subtle hints. A servant who had always smiled in your presence now avoided your gaze. A noble who once chuckled at your antics whispered conspiratorially with others when you passed. You sensed the shift immediately. The Baron was working through the network of influence he had cultivated over years, planting seeds of distrust and disloyalty. The king summoned you to the great hall, announcing a performance of improvisation and wit. Yet from the moment you arrived, you felt the court's tension. Nobles exchanged glances, murmured under their breath, and laughed at moments that seemed inappropriate. The atmosphere was charged with expectation, not amusement. The Baron sat near the king, silent but present, orchestrating the reactions around you. He had convinced certain nobles that your jokes and antics subtly undermined them, that every clever quip contained hidden criticism. They watched closely, waiting for a misstep, a poorly delivered punchline, or even a moment of hesitation that could be twisted into evidence of disrespect. You began cautiously, spinning a tale of a clever fox and a foolish king, a story carefully crafted to amuse, to flatter, and to avoid offense. But the Baron intervened subtly. "Make sure the fox reminds the king of Lord Darvin's bravery," he whispered to one of the nobles, planting a scenario where your story had to balance truth, humor, and flattery under pressure. As the story unfolded, a few nobles misinterpreted your words deliberately, feigning offense, laughing at the wrong moments, and whispering as if to correct your narrative. Each distraction was calculated to rattle your composure. You adapted, using improvisation and exaggeration, turning each perceived mistake into a comedic moment, subtly highlighting the absurdity of their reactions. The tension escalated when one noble, instructed by the Baron, challenged you directly. "Surely, Jester," he said, "you would not dare suggest that Lord Darvin is anything but perfect?" The hall watched silently, waiting for your reply, every eye on you. One wrong word could provoke outrage, insult, or humiliation. You smiled, bowed deeply, and spun the situation into comedy. "Indeed, my lord," you said, "perfection is as rare as the sun in winter, but even the sun occasionally hides behind clouds." The nobles laughed, some nervously, some genuinely, and the king's approving smile broke the tension. The Baron's eyes, however, glinted with frustration. By the end of the performance, you had survived yet another intricate scheme. The laughter of the court was earned not by chance, but by constant calculation, observation, and adaptability. You had turned potential betrayal into amusement, and the Baron's plan to isolate you had faltered for now. Retreating to your quarters, you reflected on the day. Every friend, every ally, every smile in the court could not be taken at face value. Alliances were fragile, trust was a rare commodity, and survival required more than humor. It demanded constant awareness, strategic thinking, and an ability to anticipate deception. Outside, the castle wind whispered through the towers, carrying echoes of laughter, envy, and plotting. You realized the truth of your existence. In this court, wit was survival, laughter was armor, and the fool who underestimated the ambitions of others risked more than embarrassment. He risked his life. And you, the jester, had once again navigated the treacherous waters of betrayal, keeping your humor sharp and your mind sharper, knowing that the Baron's games were far from over. The great hall glimmered with candlelight and gilded banners, but the warmth of the feast could not reach the chill in your bones. The Baron had orchestrated a gathering meant to test you in a way no previous challenge had, at a royal banquet where the stakes were life and death. You, the jester, moved carefully through the throng of nobles, aware that one misstep, one poorly timed joke, could be fatal. The king's laughter had always been your shield, but tonight the Baron sought to pierce that armor. Every table held spies, nobles, and servants alike whose loyalty had been secured or coerced by the Baron. Their eyes were fixed on you, scanning for hesitation, error, or insult that could be reported immediately to the king. Even a slight pause might be interpreted as insolence, a failure in wit, or a personal attack on the crown. The feast began with ceremony. Platters of exotic foods were brought forth, each more elaborate than the last. The Baron's subtle cruelty lay not in poison, but in flavors, textures, and timing designed to provoke reactions. The king, intrigued by the novelty, requested that you sample the dishes first. Every bite was a challenge. Make it appear delightful, even as the flavors clashed and the textures rebelled. One grimace, one hesitation, and the nobles would laugh behind your back, and the Baron would use it to discredit you. You performed with flawless precision, exaggerating delight, praising the dishes in grandiose language, and adding comedic commentary that drew laughter from the king. The Baron's lips pressed into a thin line. His trap had failed for now, but you could feel the tension tightening like a noose. Then came the subtle escalation. During a performance of song and acrobatics, a series of small mechanical traps had been rigged along the hall-hidden platforms, swinging ropes and weighted objects, all designed to catch you off guard. The Baron watched intently, confident that one slip would send you tumbling in front of the entire court. You danced across the stage, bell jingling, body twisting and leaping with precision. When a rope swung unexpectedly, you grabbed it and transformed the misstep into comedy, pretending to battle an invisible foe. When a platform shifted beneath your feet, you stumbled theatrically, bowing and spinning into a flourish that drew laughter rather than panic. The nobles were entertained. The king's applause thundered through the hall. But the Baron had one final, most dangerous device, a trapdoor disguised beneath a rug, intended to drop you into a shallow pit lined with spikes, or at least make you appear to fall dangerously. You noticed it at the last moment, and with a leap of agility and improvisation, turned the stumble into a roll, landing safely and bowing as if it were all part of the performance. The hall erupted into cheers, the king laughing heartily, while the Baron's eyes flashed with anger and disbelief. The feast concluded, but the tension lingered. You retreated to your quarters, soaked in sweat and trembling from adrenaline, realizing how narrowly you had escaped. Each day, the Baron's schemes grew more elaborate, more dangerous, and more personal. Your survival required not only wit and humor, but observation, agility, and nerves of steel. Outside, the castle towers loomed against the night sky, the wind whispering warnings and secrets. You knew that the Baron's vendetta was far from over. Every laugh, every clever retort, every acrobatic display was armor against his relentless schemes. And in this perilous court, a jester's life depended on the ability to turn even the deadliest traps into entertainment. As you lay down, bells and costumes set aside, the night pressed in, quiet yet filled with anticipation. Tomorrow, you knew, would bring a new challenge, one that might test not just your skill, but your very will to survive. The castle never felt so oppressive. Even the tapestries seemed to weigh down the walls, the torches flickering as though nervous about what was to come. You, the jester, felt the weight of every eye upon you, every shadow whispering threats and secrets. The Baron's schemes had grown relentless, cunning, and now personal. He had orchestrated a trial meant to test not only your humor, but your loyalty, ingenuity, and courage. The king summoned you to the throne room at dawn, the nobles already assembled. Their expressions ranged from eager amusement to veiled malice. The baron sat near the king, calm and calculating, his eyes following your every movement. He had devised a challenge that would determine whether you could survive one final ordeal, a trial designed to humiliate or destroy the fool entirely. "My fool," the king said, voice ringing through the vast hall. "Today your skills, courage, and wit shall be tested. Fail, and the consequences shall be severe. Succeed, and you shall earn the favor of all present." On the surface, the challenge appeared simple. Entertain the court with a combination of stories, improvisation, riddles, and acrobatics. But beneath the surface lay a web of peril. The baron had placed obstacles throughout the hall, set up staged interruptions, and enlisted nobles to mislead, distract, and provoke you. One misstep, one poorly chosen word, and the outcome could be disastrous. You began with a story, a tale of a clever fox navigating a dangerous forest filled with traps, rival predators, and hidden allies. The allegory was obvious to you. The forest mirrored the court. The fox represented the jester, and every obstacle reflected the baron's machinations. Midway, the baron introduced multiple layers of interference. A noble demanded that you praise his bravery while subtly mocking his foolishness. Another placed a riddle of impossible consequence, designed to trap your words. And mechanical surprises, hidden platforms, swinging objects, and false floors threatened to turn performance into disaster. Your heart pounded, but you relied on your years of experience, agility, and quick thinking. Each distraction was transformed into comedy. You exaggerated gestures, twisted words with clever ambiguity, and turned mechanical mishaps into moments of theatrical brilliance. The court erupted into laughter, including the king, whose applause resonated like thunder. Then came the baroness' ultimate trap, a staged confrontation with a noble who accused you of betraying the king. The accusation was subtle, framed as a jest, but intended to provoke anger, discredit you, and isolate you in front of all. The hall went silent, every eye fixed on you. One misstep could cost you your position, or worse. You paused, feeling the tension tighten around your chest. Then, with the skill honed over countless challenges, you improvised a response that diffused the accusation while amplifying comedy. Bowing low, you turned the confrontation into a playful debate, exaggerating the noblesse quirks and creating a narrative where even the accusation became a source of amusement. The court laughed, the king clapped, and the baron's face betrayed frustration beneath a mask of composure. By the end of the ordeal, you were exhausted, drenched in sweat, and trembling from adrenaline. Yet you had survived the ultimate test. Every joke, every leap, every word had been a shield and weapon. The king's laughter was genuine, your favor intact, and the baron forced to retreat into the shadows once more. Retreating to your quarters, you realized the truth. In this court, survival demanded more than humor. It required cunning, observation, courage, and the ability to transform danger into entertainment. Every day was a battle, every laugh a victory, and every misstep could be fatal. Outside, the night pressed in, the castle towers silhouetted against the moon, the wind whispering secrets and threats. You understood that while you had survived the baron's ultimate test, the world of the court was unforgiving, a place where ambition, envy, and danger lurked behind every smile and every jest. And yet, despite exhaustion and peril, you felt alive. For you were the jester, the fool, the one whose laughter protected life itself. You had turned the baron's schemes into triumph, danced along the razor's edge of danger, and survived where others might have fallen. The castle was alive with anticipation, a tension that pulsed through every stone, every torch, and every tapestry. Word had spread through the halls that the jester, your clever self, would face the baron directly in a performance that would decide not only your fate but your standing forever in the court. The nobles whispered, the servants shuffled nervously, and the king, ever intrigued by spectacle, waited with a keen gleam in his eyes. The baron had prepared his final scheme, a challenge so intricate that it combined all his previous traps: public humiliation, psychological warfare, mechanical surprises, and manipulation of allies. His goal was clear: one misstep, one poorly judged word, and your career, reputation, or even life would be forfeit. As you entered the great hall, the bells of your cap jingled softly. echoing like a heartbeat through the tension-laden chamber. The king's gaze rested upon you, full of expectation, but also trust a rare gift in this treacherous court. You knew that all your previous trials had prepared you for this moment. Every lesson in wit, observation, agility, and improvisation had led to now. The Baron stepped forward, bowing mockingly, his eyes glinting with menace. "Let us see," he said softly, "if the fool can survive the final test." The challenge began with a complex improvisational tale. You wove stories of kings, nobles, and jesters, each narrative a carefully balanced dance between truth and humor, flattery and satire. The nobles listened, unsure when to laugh, unsure when to react, but unable to resist the pull of your performance. Midway, the Baron introduced mechanical tricks-hidden platforms that shifted beneath your feet, swinging ropes and props designed to topple you. But every obstacle had been met with calculated preparation. Each stumble was transformed into comedy, each leap into a theatrical flourish, and every interruption into improvisational brilliance. Then came the Baroness' ultimate psychological trap. He called upon certain nobles to accuse you of cunningly undermining their authority through your humor. The hall grew silent, the air thick with anticipation. One wrong word, one slight misstep, and disaster would follow. You paused, heart pounding, and then turned the accusation into a masterstroke. With a bow and exaggerated gestures, you framed their accusations as misunderstandings, creating a playful, witty debate that amplified comedy rather than offense. The nobles laughed. The king leaned forward, clearly delighted. The Baron's expression, once confident, faltered. The final act was physical, a grand display of agility and dexterity. You danced across platforms, vaulted over tables, juggled objects with precision, and spun through the air with the confidence of a performer who knew every inch of the stage. Each movement drew laughter, applause, and admiration. At last you bowed deeply, bells jingling, breath ragged, sweat soaking your costume. The hall erupted in applause. The king's laughter was genuine, echoing through the chamber like triumph itself. The Baron, defeated, retreated, his schemes exposed and foiled by your wit, skill, and courage. The king rose, approaching you personally. "You have survived every test, every trap, every scheme," he said. "Your wit, courage, and ingenuity have preserved not only your life but the spirit of this court. You are no mere fool, you are a master of survival, laughter, and cleverness." From that day forward, your position was secure. Nobles who had once plotted against you now watched in awe, and the Baron's influence was diminished, unable to threaten the jester who had turned every peril into triumph. You had proven that wit was survival, laughter was armor, and intelligence and courage could outmatch envy and malice. As you retired to your quarters that night, bells set aside, you reflected on the journey. Every trial had shaped you, every danger had honed your instincts, and every laugh had been both shield and weapon. You understood now the true power of the court jester, not only to entertain but to navigate the treacherous corridors of human ambition, to turn danger into spectacle and to survive where others might have fallen. The castle was quiet, yet alive with whispers of your triumph. You, the jester, had faced deception, peril, and betrayal and emerged victorious. Your legacy was now woven into the very fabric of the court, the fool who could outwit a baron, survive every trap, and earn the king's laughter not just for amusement, but as proof of courage, intelligence, and resilience. And so, beneath the flickering torchlight and the shadowed towers of the castle, the jester's tale came to its victorious close, a life once balanced on the edge of peril, now celebrated for brilliance, courage, and the indomitable power of laughter.